So let's get to the facts. The charge has been made that the United States has shipped weapons to Iran as ransom payment for the release of American hostages in Lebanon, that the United States undercut its allies and secretly violated American policy against trafficking with terrorists. Those charges are utterly false. The United States has not made concessions to those who hold our people captive in Lebanon, and we will not. The United States has not swapped boatloads of plane loads of American weapons for the return of American hostages, and we will not. Other reports have surfaced alleging U.S. involvement. Reports of a sea lift to Iran using Danish ships to carry American arms, of vessels in Spanish ports being employed in secret U.S. arms shipments, of Italian ports being used, of the U.S. spending or sending spare parts and weapons for combat aircraft. All these reports are quite exciting, but as far as we're concerned, not one of them is true.
The charge that President Reagan personally knew of the plan to divert profits from Iranian arms sales to Contra rebels in Nicaragua was refuted today at the congressional hearings into the so-called Iran Contra affair. The former National Security Advisor, Admiral John Poindexter, said that the buck stopped with him and that he'd made a very deliberate decision not to ask the president for his approval. Admiral Poindexter explained that he wanted to give the president the option of what he called plausible deniability.
With this history in mind, we were receptive last year when we were alerted to the possibility of establishing a direct dialogue with Iranian officials. Now let me repeat, America's long-standing goals in the region have been to help preserve Iran's independence from Soviet domination, to bring an honorable end to the bloody Iran-Iraq war, to halt the export of subversion and terrorism in the region. A major impediment to those goals has been an absence of dialogue, a cutoff in communication between us. It's because of Iran's strategic importance and its influence in the Islamic world that we chose to probe for a better relationship between our countries.
However, he did say that Mr. Reagan approved weapons sales to Iran strictly as an arms for hostages deal. So far, the president has claimed that arms deals were not started as a trade for hostages, but instead to win over moderate forces in Iran. Tonight, the White House spokesman, Marlin Fitzwalter, said the president felt gratified at having his statements on the diversion of funds to the Contras confirmed. As for trading arms for hostages, the president apparently cannot recall either seeing or signing a document approving that deal. He does not, however, dispute the contention that he did so.
Let me repeat, our interests are clearly served by opening a dialogue with Iran and thereby helping to end the Iran-Iraq war. That war has dragged on for more than 6 years with no prospect of a negotiated settlement. The slaughter on both sides has been enormous, and the adverse economic and political consequences for that vital region of the world have been growing.
Throughout the conduct of my entire tenure at the National Security Council, I assumed that the President was aware of what I was doing and had, through my superiors, approved it. On or about Friday, November 21st, I asked Admiral Poindexter directly, does the President know? He told me he did not.
The implication of North's testimony was that there were only two explanations. Either Poindexter and the late CIA director William Casey were in some kind of a conspiracy with the president to pursue a covert foreign policy, or Poindexter and Casey were in a conspiracy to keep the president in the dark. It is this stark choice which has transfixed Washington for months. And if Poindexter did not tell the president, why not? Poindexter first described how Oliver North came to him in February 1986 with his neat idea to take money from the Ayatollah and use it to finance the Contras.
He said something to the effect that, Admiral, I think I have found a way that we can legally provide some funds to the democratic resistance through funds that will accrue from the arms sales to the Iranians. To make a long story short, in the end, I thought it was a very good idea at the end of this conversation, and I personally approved it.
Did he ask you for your approval?
I don't recall how he phrased his request, but he was clearly looking for a signal from me whether or not to proceed ahead along this line.
And you gave it.
And I gave it to him. I
And
personally did.
Mr. Chairman,
If Poindexter had given North approval, did he then go and seek his own authorization for this major foreign policy initiative from his superior, President Reagan? This led to the crucial question of the whole scandal.
Although I was convinced that we could properly do it and that the president would approve if asked, I made a very deliberate decision not to ask the president so that I could insulate him from the decision and provide some future deniability for the president if it ever leaked out. Of course, our hope was that it would not leak out.
And so that the answer is you did not tell the President of the United States.
I did not.
And that for a period of whatever it is, 9 months, you kept it from the President of the United States for the reasons you've given.
Mr. Lyman, this clearly was an important decision, but it was also an implementation of very clear policy. If the president had asked me, I very likely would have told him about it, but he didn't, and I think it's, you know, an important point here is that on this whole issue, you know, the buck stops here with me. I made the decision. I felt that I had the authority to do it. I thought it was a good idea. I was convinced that the president would, in the end, think it was a good idea. But I did not want him to be associated with the decision.
We already know from North's testimony that the CIA director, Bill Casey, also knew about the diversion of funds from the very start. So, Poindexter was asked, had he ever discussed the subject with Mr. Casey? Had they together conspired not to tell the president?
Did you ever discuss with Mr. Casey the diversion?
I did not.
Why not?
Because I wanted to keep the issue highly compartmented. As I said and have testified before this morning, to my knowledge, Colonel North and I were the only ones that knew about it. Mr. Casey had to come up to the Hill to testify before the intelligence committees, and I did not want him to have to be evasive in answering questions.
We now know that in answering those congressional questions, Director Casey was more than evasive. He lied. There did come a point, however, when Admiral Poindexter was tempted to tell the president about the policy being carried out in his name.
That he says, look, I don't want to pull out our support for the Contras for any reason. This would be an unacceptable option. Isn't there something that I could do unilaterally? And by that, I took it to mean that he could do on his own that didn't require congressional approval. And I was sorely tempted at that point to tell him what we had working, but I thought better of it and did not.
And that was because you realized this would be so controversial.
That's correct.
So that again, it's the more controversial the issue, the less the president was to be told.
I'm going to object.
so that we could assist in bringing about a ceasefire and eventually a settlement. We have sought to be even-handed by working with both sides and with other interested nations, prevent a widening of the war. This sensitive undertaking has entailed great risk for those involved. There is no question but that we could never have begun or continued this dialogue had the initiative been disclosed earlier.